It's 5-ish seconds. I don't know. I don't want to.
There's literally
there's a counter
code in the upper left.
Look, guys, if I can't do it with my fingers, I like to eat food by hand. We're back. We're here to talk
We're keeping
about,
all this in.
We're keeping all of it. We're here to talk about horology, the art of telling time. We're here to talk about hand-based foods. Mostly, we're here to talk about two things: games and music, with our wonderful friend Will Savino. You're listening to Why We Roll, the tabletop game design podcast from the Stillfleet studio. I'm Wythe Marschall, and the other co-host, of course, as always, is...
Hey, I'm Chris Pickett.
And,
what's up, Wythe?
What's up? Hey, how's it going, Chris? Nice to have you on our show that you and I created.
That we do regularly.
That we do all the time. And it's really nice to have Will back. Will is a friend, and we've had Will on before, but we thought we'd just check in. I think I forgot exactly in what context this came up. Probably Gunless Gauchos.
I think it's the game that you're publishing.
It might be Dance Macabre as well. It's probably both. So,
whoops.
Yeah.
Will, thanks for joining.
Oh, right. We're doing that. Oh, shit.
I'm one of those eels. I'm one of those eels that sucks onto sharks, and I just want to attach myself to whatever Stillfleet thing is going on at any given time.
I think you mean remora, which are a kind of fish, I think.
Eel are fish. Eels are fish. Are remoras not? You know what? Let's cancel whatever we were planning on talking about. We don't care about the game.
For the taxonomy of fish.
This is a remora podcast now.
Yeah. Welcome to Why We Remora.
Not remotely an eel. It doesn't look like an eel.
It doesn't look like an eel. It looks like a little fish, yeah. I
was thinking of lamprey, but lamprey don't really do that.
I think lamprey are what live in your toilets in X-Files episodes. And that's
man. I was just watching X-File earlier while I was working on illustrations.
A single X-File?
One X-File.
A single X-File, yes. I watched an X-File, and then I went to go see a Star Wars. Will Savino, hey, welcome back. Yes.
Hey, thank you for having me. Exclusive Three-Timers Club.
Yeah, Three-Timers Club.
You're
welcome.
A three-timer, yeah. You might be the first. You might be the most. Maybe Ethan.
Oh, now we got to make a badge.
Team members, yeah. Will, for folks who haven't heard your earlier, digging through the crates, you should go back and listen to Will say smart things in the past. They hold up. These are, time immemorial, evergreen content blocks about.
I think my Why We Roll appearances will be my legacy. This will outlast me.
I like to think so.
The aliens will arrive from the nearest galaxy after many years of travel at relativistic speeds, and they'll say, "We would like to talk to the gentleman who had some interesting thoughts in the year 2023 about
that guy who has 60 tavern tracks." What's he? He died thousands of years ago.
Oh, Bardcore never caught on. Well, then we will obliterate your planet, and that was the end. So, Will, for those
the idea of an advanced civilization that Bardcore is their one cultural export.
That's it. Yeah, that's their one thing.
I'm gonna put my foot down right now. Sorry to be this guy right off the bat. I do not make Bardcore. I do not.
No, you don't.
You don't. Label.
I knew you were going to say this.
I'm so sorry. I mean, I say that I make. To be this guy, I say that I make fantasy music. Bardcore. I mean, there are a few different definitions of it, but. So usually it's really bad MIDI covers of pop music, and it's like direct translation of pop instrumentation to medieval or faux medieval instruments,
vaguely fife-like.
Right, but also with no thought given to performance practice. You know what? Yeah, we're getting immediately.
We're getting right into it. This is great. No,
here's a really easy example. You hear a synth chord in most pop music, it's usually not going to be arpeggiated at all. The standard synth chord, 3 or so notes, is just going to play all notes at the same time. That is famously a thing that you basically will never do on a lute or other strummed plucked instrument, because you have to, strum one string and then another. So any chord you play on a guitar as well, or lute or theorbo or whatever the hell, is always going to be strummed. And so when I hear Bardcore music and it's just playing chords on a lute as though you're playing them on a piano, just, all three at the same time, it's you have lost all of your, fantasy credibility.
What are your thoughts on synth?
My disbelief on.
What are your thoughts on synth harpsichords?
Yeah, like it's fine, right? And like honestly, well, this is we were talking about Dungeon Synth recently. Well, let's get into it. Danse
Yeah.
Macabre,
Dungeon Synth.
fabulous game. Happy to be
Thank you.
contributing to the soundtrack, pending like a couple $100 on the stretch goal. As of
Oh, we're so close.
recording.
We're very close. We're very close as of recording. Monday.
It'll
October
happen.
20th.
Yeah. Dungeon Synth. If you hear something like that in Dungeon Synth, likewise, you hear totally MIDI lute or whatever playing notes not remotely attached to what would be realistic performance practice from any previous era. That to me is like totally okay, acceptable, even encouraged, because the whole point of Dungeon Synth is there's no like it's not meant to sound real, right?
Yeah, it's not meant to sound like a historical piece of music. It's kind of a genre unto itself, right?
Exactly. And like the retro and the like sort of intentionally shittiness of the sound is like the vibe. Whereas in Bardcore, I legitimately think like 99% of people making that kind of music, it's like, oh, listen to this. It's I'm all about that bass, but medieval. It's not medieval. Two, I think they're trying to do it and failing, and that to me is just do bad pop music.
Yeah,
right. So you're saying it's like, what is the intention, and that's how you judge the music. It's all about what are the constraints of the genre for people who claim to be operating in a very niche. That this genre has its own specific language.
Certainly, right? And like arguably, it's just not fair of me to even be commenting on this because I'm not in the Bardcore community. I do not like Bardcore. So like the fact that I think that like it's all bad is like, well, then I'm not. That's like
we're gonna.
What if you
we're gonna get flamed?
Canceled? Yeah, exactly.
Good.
Because of somebody who just made like Pink Pony Club, but with the lute, is just like I cannot believe Will Savino said that.
It kind of reminds me of conversations that we've had with Zoe and Matt from the Maniculum podcast about medievalism versus, like medieval studies, right? Like when you're doing a medievalism, it's kind of a hodgepodge. You're kind of picking and choosing. You're trying to get a vibe. And that, like, to me, like Bardcore, I think the operative word is bard, right? Like we're thinking of D&D, we're thinking of a very specific type of fantasy and medievalism. So I don't know. I'd be curious. Maybe we should do a roundtable where we get some Bardcore artists on the podcast
and like actual medieval recreation music.
Yeah.
Neither. And
that'd be fascinating.
Yeah.
I almost never could claim that music that I make is medieval, even when I'm making fantasy music that like an untrained listener would consider medieval, because aside from a very few exceptions where I'm actually trying to make something that is like, quasi-diegetic. And when I say diegetic, I kind of mean like real world diegetic, like earth diegetic, even though it's for a fantasy context. So aside from a very select few examples of that, usually I'm making like fantasy music that's meant to evoke the ideas of fantasy places, some of which are inspired by medieval Europe. But like often like modern fantasy seems to lean way more Renaissance as a rule than ignoring the fact that like, there are like robots and steampunk shit in like almost everything. Like even ignoring that, like if you Google like fantasy city and just like browse through ArtStation, very little of that it would be what you two would know as medieval, right? Like there would be examples of architectural flourishes. It's like, well, that's looking a little more modern. But also, like, who cares if it's fantasy? Except if you want to use the word medieval, you should mean it.
That's kind of to Chris's point about medievalism, is because the deeper you go with this shit, it turns out you end up. I mean, it's like any other niche. It's like it becomes, all encompassing. Where real medieval historians, not me, but people like Zoe and Mac, that type of scholar could identify, depending on what they study. Right, there's also people who only look at clothes or only look at architecture. In terms of like,
it gets pretty niche.
They could look at a building and say, because of the way the cornices were masoned, that was made, it had to be between like 1390 and 1400, not earlier, not later. And the same with like a depiction in a painting of someone's like blousey shirt. Like, okay, the color used, the way that it's cut, like it had to be 1410 to 1420. Like any genre like that, you get real into like the constraints. But I feel like that's not what people playing fantasy RPGs want. They don't really care. And you see the equivalent. I've been making this case with Danse Macabre players who say, "Oh, I don't know anything about history," but they play, you know, in Faerun or Ravenloft or whatever, right? And you could do the same thing in those settings. You could try to like read through all the lore from the 80s about like, but who cares, right? It's like more fun to just make shit up and be like, I don't know, you know, maybe we live in a slightly different version of the world, whatever the world is, because it's a fantasy experience. It's a simulation, not reality. So I think the music, you know, it would go along with that, right? You're not trying, unless you
but that's exactly my point, right? Yeah. Like, because I'm making fantasy music, what matters so much. I don't even think I've said this yet. I make fantasy music. That's like my job.
Yeah. I know. I keep thinking like, oh, we have to actually introduce Will at some point.
My name is Will Savino.
59. Yeah.
My name is Will Savino. I've written almost 600 tracks for use in tabletop RPGs. That's kind of the main thing that I do. But I also write. I do a lot of fantasy world building for my company, Borough Bound.
AKA Mr. 600.
Yeah, that's right.
Have him on the pod, guys. Mr. 600.
I keep, next week, next year it'll be Mr. 700. You know.
It keeps going. Yeah.
So I like doing fantasy music specifically because, well, I like having the freedom to make whatever I want. Right. I like being able to make. This is Wild Western inspired music one week, and then this is weird jungle music the next week, and not. I'm not trying to be disingenuous or use inspiration and references flippantly, but also because it's fantasy, like I don't have to be strict on, if this were a period appropriate Bach performance, they wouldn't be using vibrato in that way, right? Like that kind of stuff is great and fun, and I love performers who do historically informed classical music performances and folk music performances, but I don't want to get that deep, right? I'd rather do like, this is enough of the reference point where the listener is going to be like, I am transported to a time and place, which, as long as I'm not being offensive, is like mostly my goal.
Right, and the same like with from a writing standpoint, I'd say with Danse Macabre, it's like when we're writing these settings, it's not like, this is a argument in European history or Asian history or whatever about time and place. It's more like we read enough about it to tell some interesting zombie fiction stories that to give you the tools, the props to tell those stories. So it's like, if anything, it's a mashup of, a cursory reading of, different kinds of history plus a pretty in-depth reading of just like tropes, which is like any good, RPG design, right? You're trying to design props for people to tell stories of some kind, one or another, whatever genre it is. So in this case, it's like, okay, fighting zombies, doing a politics, trying to survive. In another game, it might be other props. But I do think there's something shared, whether it's music or writing or art. It's like, unless you're doing some weird fine art practice, or as you say, just like classical. I guess classical would queue up exact recreation. Whereas
even then, there's basically...
Even that's such a broad category.
Sure. Yeah. Like, even if you're doing like there are a million schools of thought, but you could, this is not my area of expertise. I mean, like I studied music composition, but I didn't study, specifically, I don't have a master's in music, I have a master's in composition, right? But like, there are people who do try to perform music that was written long ago in the past in the way that they would perform it at the time. And then a lot of people like don't care about that. Like a lot of people are like, here's my interpretation of Bach as a person in 2025. And both are good for different reasons. But with both of what we do, and writing and music, I think the goal of knowing any of that, right? The reason why you both have benefited so much writing Danse Macabre from doing like some pretty hefty deep dives into medieval history.
And for sure.
Is because that then acts as fabulous inspiration, right? Like fundamentally it's inspiration. It makes for a cooler game world. It gives you cool concepts to explore. Like, I don't know, if you tried writing this 5 years ago without having done your history research, would you have included the Bogomils as a faction? Maybe, because you're smart people. I had never friggin' heard of the Bogomils until you brought them up recently. But they're a sick faction that you know about because you did research, and now they're in a game, and a bunch of people are going to run sick campaigns where they become friends with like the weird, ascetic socialists from was it Balkans or Macedonia? Where were they?
Originally from the Balkans. And then kind of, spreading out from there. But yeah, the Bogomils and the Cathars, super sick. Yeah, Gnostic, dualist, Christian socialists. They were just
So
so
likewise,
neat. I just
my
love them.
composer peers who make the best music
I feel like
are my composer peers who listen to the most broad music, right? So if you have the cool inspirations, then you're going to make better stuff. Sometimes it means they're making, incrementally more faithful, quote unquote, medieval music, but that's like so many layers removed from realistic authenticity that it doesn't matter. It just means, oh, well, you probably learned a lot by listening to this, and it comes through in your music.
Yeah,
Well, let's talk about simulating something else.
Okay,
which
yeah.
is, the Pampas. Because in addition to music, which is excellent, you also write, fantasy cities and write sort of, all the things game designers write. But you've been working in system-agnostic mode as, Borough Bound is kind of the main writer, mostly the writer for Borough Bound.
Yeah.
Whereas recently you did work, you pitched us, and we ended up publishing a little thing which we hope we'll make some nice prints of for PAX. A sort of one-page game, back front type game set. Really anywhere just that's a frontier, and you sort of styled it as like a fantasy Western style game, but removing colonialism and also removing guns. So it's got some of the sort of vibes of a frontier game. It's got really nice quick touchstones for that. I thought this was an interesting idea, in part because you've written these, to me, very good, deep, crunchy in a fun way, and also easy to use, lots of cool narrative hooks, cities that don't have any mechanics or anything. And then when you mechanicalize something, it was like very short to the point and very focused on like, you are, a gaucho, you live somewhere on the plains, somewhere remote, there's no guns, it's fantasy, but you're in sort of a Western setting, and okay, how do we break that down to a couple sort of tables, and what do you do? So I thought it was interesting to see your work from another side, and was just curious kind of, I guess, to pick your brain about that and some of the differences between these practices, music,
yeah, totally,
designing worlds but no rules, and then designing rules. And I don't know, I think it sounded like when we were talking before the show, you might do more of the rules designing at some point. So, just take it away. I don't know if you want to sort of tell us about Gunless Gauchos, tell listeners.
So I made a game called Gunless Gauchos. I made, same as with almost everything that I do in the RPG land, I initially was just like, oh, I need this for my home campaign. Like I had no intention of monetizing it, which I mean, I don't know that I've successfully monetized it anyway, but it does exist. Pay what you want. But I made it I was running a Western campaign. Embarrassed to say, this is a campaign with friends of mine, which uses the Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition rule set.
How dare you?
I know, dirty. It's just like that. I got friends. They're not going to learn a new game, so like we've been playing this 5e campaign for a little bit. It was already
whatever gets people to the table.
Yeah, it was already a Western campaign, and it already had a ton of homebrew rules, just like unique mechanics that I had brought into it. Like there's a sort of hex crawly thing. There's all sorts of rules for what happens when you do anti-colonialist stuff, which was just baked directly into the mechanics. I think I may have mentioned that on a previous appearance here. But I was just like, okay, I actually want to explore more deeply the sort of Western stories that I'm interested in. And I want to play with tropes, like explicitly. I like this sort of narrative trappings that are baked into Western stories, frontier stories. But I still like fantasy stuff. And for the sake of an RPG, I just don't like instant lethality, which guns tend to imply. And I do still like, wizards and skeletons and stuff. So I was like, can I have my cake and eat it too? And the answer is yeah, sure. Just make rules that are like, that treat the world as though it is authentically, a Western narrative as possible. Frontier stuff, you're on a horse, you probably got a lasso, you're drinking hooch, you're keeping to the shadows, all that stuff. You got a dark past. But you're probably going to try to do something good, but it'll all end up gone awry in the end, right? I love all that stuff.
You are Batman or one of Batman's enemies.
It
I wanted
all
to do all that
turns
stuff,
to dust.
but I just wanted it to also be fantasy, which I just didn't see there being any problem with. I read Red Country by Joe Abercrombie, which is one of a series of books that he wrote 10 books based in the same world, and it's all fantasy stuff, but like one of them is just like a weird assassination revenge sort of almost Ocean's 11-y kind of thing. One of them is just a straight up Western. So they explore a lot of genres, but like the book is a Western, but it's also in a fantasy world and no one's got guns, but they're on horses, you know. So I wrote an RPG like that, and I wanted to keep it simple because I'm so done with 5e. And so the rules are simple. They try to be as narrative focused as possible. There are a lot of like little things. You know, here's a basic one that I think gets the point across. When you attempt something particularly difficult, the GM may say, quote, dig your grave. You must either take a -1 penalty to the roll or immediately confront an additional complication. You know, it's kind of my way of doing, it's kind of my way of doing, you know, disadvantage or otherwise, you know, this is a extra difficult roll, but I wanted to transform it a little bit so that, you know, there's the option to reinterpret purely narratively. And so when I played this with my pals, I mean, they're doing that all the time, right? Oh, I don't want to take a -1 penalty in a game where you're only rolling a d6. That's too risky. I'd rather just you give me something that is like unambiguously bad that automatically happens, which like mechanically, obviously that's worse, but it's also more narratively fulfilling to be like, you know what? I'll bring this on myself. I'm a cowboy. I'll suffer the consequences.
Yeah, that reminds me of a scene I saw. We're moving, and we had a repair person fixing ceiling issues, and I came up and down the stairs, and my wife who's always watching, you know, like normal TV I would expect her to watch, is just watching a Western, which I've never ever seen her watch. And it's like Sam Elliott talking to a younger cowboy, and he's seated, and there's a bunch of people like behind them, you know, not in focus, and the younger
the Big Lebowski, yeah.
Yeah, that one.
And this guy's like,
they're in a bowling alley.
Like, I'll stay here while you do the cowboy stuff. And Sam Elliott looks at him and he's like, you're coming to move some cows. Like, if we can't trust these people to sit alone for a few hours on a riverbank, like, I don't think they'll survive or something. And it was such a stupid, like, it was like, this is like a role you failed, like a charming boss out of trying to do a dangerous thing. And like, you totally failed. But I don't know why I think of it mechanically. I GM games. But it is a very, very specific setting. It's like we don't have genres otherwise, other than with the Western, about like other 20, 30-year periods in like specific empires.
So narrow.
It's so specific.
I mean, I guess Golden Age of piracy stuff.
Kind of.
I guess the pirates.
Stuff. Yeah, I was going to say pirates, but that's also. I mean, that's also kind of like, you know, how fantasy generally treats the medieval period, where it's like you're stretched out and you're taking bits of stuff that happened afterwards and beforehand and kind of just making a pastiche out of the whole thing.
Pirates also
which is not a criticism, but it's just, you know, is what it is.
There's a lot of pirates, and I think that while that generally it is the early modern Caribbean pirates you're talking about, I get it, but like if you look at One Piece or something, they're also referencing just more broadly like
Please do not tell me to look at One Piece. I have a child and I do not have time to do that.
Well,
it's time. No, you have to start them now, because by the time your kid is like 6 or 7, you'll have gotten
halfway through
everything.
By the time you're like in hospice, you'll share the very end of One Piece with them. They'll be like, Pa, you'll finally find out what Luffy's journey was all about. This whole thing. So I don't know what I was.
We'll finally find out what the One Piece is.
Oh yeah, so I liked how you distilled down some of those key themes from this very specific thing and open it up to be very non-specific. You can be an elf, you can be anything you want, but there's no guns. We're not doing a colonialism, but still you wanted it to read as Western. So like you said, dig your grave, or just the fact that one of your skills is horse, made me laugh, and also felt like to do that. And you know,
it also mechanically is like fairly balanced. I don't know. There are 4 stats in this game. It's grit, moxie, awareness, horse. I'm very happy with those 4 stats, aside from the fact that they don't make a good acronym, which, you know, good stats should make a good acronym. But I'm really happy with how those work. The specifically because when I've play tested this, the those four things encompass literally everything a cowboy does, or a cowboy archetype character in any world. And two, it actually does provide for like meaningful build diversity, which is an insane thing to say about like a one-page RPG, like build diversity. But like, there's just like I played with, in the couple playtest campaigns I've done of this, like a very wide variety of different player archetypes, just by focusing on those different stats.
No, yeah, and that's one reason I think it's worth even talking about, because I mean, not to diss anyone doing micro games, but a one-page game is usually so brief it's hard to pull out like really what would I do with this, like what it's a prop for like kind of a party game vibe.
Yeah.
Whereas we focus on kind of replayable things that you could do, campaigns, West marches, run a bunch of one-offs at a con, write your own material. But I think there's something about the focus on like this specific setting and what are hallmarks of it that I am keeping, what are some hallmarks I'm getting rid of, and then opening it up and saying, okay, there's going to be one piece of art. It's going to be an elf on a horse, and somehow convey fantasy and cowboyness. So I think that's kind of a fun design exercise, and made me go back to like, oh man, I got to write some of these one-page games, because it's fun. It's fun to constrain yourself and try to boil it down to, whether it's 4 scores, whatever it is. Probably, a good exemplar still is like Honey Heist or something, 2 scores. Right. Then it actually works. There's build diversity, kind of. There's sort of 2 main strategies. You could say 3, sure. Right? There's like min-max and balance. And with 4, to your point, you get like a lot more complexity, and you don't really need much more.
And so there's 4 stats and there's 20 skills, and you get 3 skills, and just like that, plus the couple extra tiny, mostly narrative little suggestions that I say, like decide what haunts you is one of the things that this. That sounds very indie RPG in an almost obnoxious way, but it is very appropriate for
it really does.
Game. And aside from that, it's pretty much the stats and the skills. But even there, it's like enough. I don't know. I'm a narrative. The more I play RPGs, the more I like really find that the thing that I care about at the end of the day was, did we have a fun, sick story, and also did we laugh the whole time? I like to write serious games. I like to write serious content, but ultimately, when I'm playing tabletop with my buds, it's for chuckles, and we take the story seriously, but we're trying to laugh the whole time we do it. And I don't think that makes the game any less serious.
Yeah, there's gallows humor. I think there's meta humor. Yeah,
right.
Sorry,
yeah, but the
I was gonna say. I mean, we experienced the same thing with playtests of Dance Macabre,
yeah.
right? Like it's a fairly dark setting. It's pretty grim, but like people have a lot of fun with the mutations and like describing their character, and it's always funny. It's always weird, and I think that that core component of just like having joy while you're playing is so important, no matter what your setting looks like, really.
But I also need there to be some amount of, I don't want to say complexity, but like mechanical, maybe just stakes. Like, oh, I know enough about my character. I know enough about like the rules of this game that like, when I do something that requires a die or any other, RPG peripheral mechanic to get involved, I know sort of that there will be consequences. And I'm taking the story at least serious enough to care about what these numbers and what these rules do, even if it's not like, here are the 300 spells at the back of the book and the exact rules for like, ranges. I don't care about that stuff, even though I've played in games where that stuff has been fun. I just decreasingly care about that as like the meaningful way to engage with the story. But dice rolls are still cool. The rules are still cool. And narrative mechanics, PBTA inspired or whatever, is still cool. And so, yeah, 1 page, but you still have to do a couple things.
Yeah. Stakes. I mean, I completely agree. I couldn't agree more that stakes is like number 1 in a way. Because, I mean, and I agree, most of the time people laugh a lot. It's meta. People are goofing off. But even if you were going to be hyper serious, either way, I don't think you could have as much fun without stakes. It's hard to laugh. It's almost like with comedy, like the meanness of stand-up comedy is the stakes. You know what I mean? Like if there's not the threat that a sort of drunk psycho on stage is going to start berating you, then it's not really that funny. It's too nice. And I think there's some of the RPGs where that the dice, the fact you could die in some way, or if it's a realistic cozy sim, you could do bad on your math test or whatever it is, that provides the sort of it's like you always want a chained up bear in the room, you know. So if it's stand up, it's a drunk psycho making fun of you and your girlfriend in front of an audience. If it's you and your friends pretending to be cowboys or anti-cowboys or whatever, it's maybe I fuck this job up, or maybe I hurt myself or someone, you know. It's like there's got to be something there. And so mechanicalizing it can be ultra simple, it can be really complex, but I think that is a good way to frame, like, where are we starting? You know, what do you want to model? What are your constraints?
Yeah.
I do have a question about this, Will, which is, in playtests, have you been setting Gunless Gauchos in anything like a realistic Earth-like frontier, or even more broadly, where have you been setting your what is your compass? You know what I mean?
Okay.
I was curious about that too.
So I
was curious about like how you interpret frontier spaces as well.
So two sort of questions. I'll answer quickly where I've done them first. The first one was in a setting that I literally just called the Frontier, which was for this lengthy 5e sort of Western campaign. We did a sort of side quest arc with different characters, where we used Gunless Gauchos as the system for that. And that is, a slightly fantasy version of the American Wild West, sort of bounded by the Rockies. There are elves and there are orcs and stuff, but there's not just like, here are the enchanted lands, right? Like it is still basically geography that one would recognize as being tied to American landscapes, right? I also ran a playtest in a completely different setting, in a Borough Bound setting that we released, called Brimspur, which is literally here's a crossroads in hell, and there are like demons and devils and whatnot, and it's sort of inexplicably Western themed. And that was like max fantasy, extremely stupid. Like the plot was still a sort of Western vibe. It was you need to ensure that your dead friend's soul ends up in the hands of the least bad devil. That was basically like the inciting incident. But it was truly dumber than shit the whole way through, like just only laughs and jokes while still trying to take the stakes seriously.
It's very like John Constantine or Lucifer. It's very like Vertigo Comics kind of thing.
Yeah. Super over the top. It works in both because it doesn't matter, right? Like the rules don't really care whether the world is super loosey-goosey, as long as you, the character, and like the way your GM thinks about the tone of the world is vaguely frontier-ish, meaning fringes of society, combat or violence rather is an expectation. The law is not as ensconced in the world as you might expect it to be in quote-unquote civilization. So as long as you're on a frontier, interpret it as broadly as possible. Like you could totally do Gunless Gauchos in the final frontier, right? Like you could absolutely do a space Gunless Gauchos. It would be a little weird for it to be in space, but no guns.
Yeah.
I don't see,
It feels like a golden age. That's like an Asimov era, like a story that was published somewhere.
Yeah,
right.
They get all the way to space and like they're still fighting with swords just because why not? Space opera.
Or even like
Dune.
It's guns.
Dune is kind of, it's not a Western exactly.
No, Dune is kind of a Western in a sense. I mean, it's kind of
Dune's got Western vibes.
Yeah. Dune's an anti-Western, Western, which is great.
We have like techno-barbarian kind of genre stuff.
So I guess I care much more about the really basic genre trappings here, partially because, I mean, one of the reasons I wanted to do a Western campaign with this group of friends in the first place is because they are really good at talking their way out of problems when we've run like strictly fantasy campaigns, and like they're good at taking the nonviolent approach, which is fun in a tabletop game, but it's kind of shit in 5e where so much of the mechanical depth lies in the combat. So I was like, if we're gonna be playing 5e, I need to like set this campaign somewhere where like violence is an expectation. So that just got me thinking a lot more about frontiers as like
Yeah.
a meaningful setting and like thinking more carefully about in a really like zoomed out sense, like what are the different important elements of a setting in terms of how it relates to RPG gameplay without even thinking about genre. Like, okay, yes, it's a fantasy setting, but is this, settled and urban? Is this a border town? Is this a frontier? Is this, is this some podunk? And how does that manifest? I've written campaign worlds that don't have enough space for dungeons, and that, you kind of work yourself into a corner there trying to write adventures where it's like, oh, I like designed a whole world and I didn't design any dungeons for it. That can be a problem, but I think setting a campaign in the frontier just solves a lot of those automatically.
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting. Again, this discussion just brings up something we've talked about a lot on the show in the past. We haven't really focused on recently. We've been talking about some other themes, but the difference between narrative structure, like what the players do, the genre, which is like the collection of tropes that define the kind of activity that the game is about, which is a little different than the tight narrative structure of like, wait, but what am I doing in this world? And then the setting, which is just spamming details, which in a way is only relevant in as much as you get excited about it, but it really isn't the story. The story is doing the narrative structure in the style of the genre, and the genre is usually defined by those tropes. So if it's a quote unquote Western or frontier story, you might expect certain kinds of activities, and you are kind of fucking with them, subverting them, whatever. But as you say, you can also like, and you're in space, you're in a kind of frontier, or like Dune, like say is kind of a story about people on a sort of frontier encountering indigeneity and robber baron, bad capitalists, and like all the things that they're dealing with, lack of water, right, resources. So I think
Dune is a Western. I think you've got me convinced.
Yeah.
I'm convinced. Yeah, I'm convinced.
So I think it's cool to I don't know, just say like, look, I like Westerns, how can I kind of break this down and figure out what about this I like and how to do it. And I will say, I've been thinking about this a lot too, because like people have asked me, like, I don't usually run games with quite as much combat. Danse Macabre has a lot of combat with mutant zombies, and what I've been trying to do with the Paris games is write for Unsunken, the Paris setting for Danse Macabre, is like write stories where you could have as much mutant zombie combat as you want, or you could have kind of zero, because it's really about clues and like following sort of a thread for a political machination, like, and what is happening between two factions or whatever, and your feelings about that as a person, a peasant in Paris. And then if you end up fighting mutant zombies, great, and that's fun, but also you can kind of like just do the clue finding, interacting with NPCs bit. And I think you can kind of apply that. I mean, I'm thinking broadly, like, man, I kind of want to apply this generally with writing, where it's like there's always some encounters given for combat, because people do like combat. The 5e heads want the but like you can also just like skip it, and like just keep moving, and okay, yeah, you guys run away from some demoniacs, whatever. That's you're not, your goal is not to kill people in most games. It is weird that in Delta Green and 5e your job is basically to kill people, but in most simulators of other things you're simulating like other aspects of life, not just soldiering,
But I also think that's like that's a strict reading of I don't mean to defend Wizards of the Coast, but like this is where there's such a dissonance between like what a rule book says and how a game is actually played. Like if you listen to any actual play podcast, which I think is the thing inspiring an entire generation of RPG gamers, tabletop gamers, that is,
for sure.
So many actual play podcasts don't like have a lot of combat. They obviously only use milestone leveling up. They're not tracking XP for killing goblins. They're using D&D as a framework for telling stories, because it is, like monoculture bullshit, and it's a thing that they can expect people know, so it seems like a safe bet for a podcast, whatever. But like, just because in the 2014 rules it says you should be tracking XP and you should only be giving XP based on killing things, like I literally don't know a person who runs a game where they actually treat it that way.
Yeah, or the old school thing of XP is gold. I mean, I hear you. It's like pretty quickly, I think people have these games in both directions. You have people adding combat. You can do combat with troll dolls and Barbie dolls, and do Warhammer versions of anything. You can also do AP style pure narrative operatic versions of any
Right.
system. But I do think, and this comes up a lot among game designers, but it's like,
Sure.
what is written down? Like, are there
Yeah.
rules for combat? And 5e has so many rules for combat. Granted,
For
so does
sure.
the game, like Stillfleet or Danse Macabre, but I think they also are giving you a narrative structure that is pretty expressly like your job is not to kill, it's to do
Yeah.
some other thing, and killing is, incidental.
Right.
5e, I mean, I guess, to your point, I guess most GMs don't frame it as your job's to kill goblins, to your point. It's not like that.
Yeah.
It's like your
I
job's
mean,
to go help these
it's
people
to kill
in this
God,
town.
and the goblins will be probably on the way.
Yeah, God kills
Yeah, yeah,
goblins.
yeah. The goblins are just chaff. They're just
Yeah.
in your way, on your way to becoming God by killing God. Yes, absolutely. Jesus.
Well, that was, now to totally
Well,
flip
I'm
sides.
curious, Will.
So we're talking over each other a little bit because of lag.
Go ahead.
Sorry, Chris. The
No, you're
part
good.
of
You're good. Go ahead, please.
I'll switch sides now and denigrate 5e. Part of my problem with trying to run a Western story, well, basically using the 5e rules is, really early on, like by level 5 or something, every player has something about their character where even if they're trying to role play a Western person, they can do these like insane feats, magical or otherwise, that just so take you out of the fantasy. It's just like, okay, like one of my guys
Yeah,
wanted
you
to play an
bend
artificer.
reality.
Yeah. One of my guys wanted to play an artificer, and artificers are cool. I think mechanically they're a fun class, but they're, inventors. And I think inventors in a cowboy world is kind of cool. We could go Westworld or even like the Will Smith friggin' Wild Wild West. That's funny. It's like a hilarious move to go through. But like, the fantasy kind of fell apart when he's like building cannons on the fly. And it's like, well, this doesn't necessarily feel like the version of the fantasy that I wanted to write, and we're losing some of the aspects of it. So the story of that campaign eventually became, hey man, magic is progressing very quickly in this world, to account for the leveling up party, because how do you challenge them otherwise? And then magic becomes sort of the stand-in for industrialization. Does the frontier still exist when one wizard can reshape reality? Well, no. I mean, that one wizard is probably going to become an agent of colonialism, ends up being what the story's about. And so we got to leave this frontier behind because we're not relevant anymore because, trains plus westward expansion, except no, it's actually just like wizards or two, like because that was the only story I could tell using 5e as a framework. Because eventually, you got 6 level 10 players, and it's like, I'm sorry, you have to be confronted with a wizard. Otherwise, there's no mechanical capacity to what's going to happen.
Yeah, and I think this goes back to the question of stakes, right? And like the stakes in
exactly.
a Western, at least in my favorite Western novels, right? Any kind of Cormac McCarthy, like all the purposes defined for me, especially like a Western with very little guns in it. But the stakes are that like you are down and out on your luck against the world, and world is not a kind place to be on the frontier. And so yeah, when you get to level 5, level 6 in D&D, and like you said, you have these reality bending powers. Where do the stakes go at that point?
Right. So Gunless
Gauchos, how I feel about
is
wizards in general, but
Gunless Gauchos is sort of my attempt to be like, okay, I'm not going to give level up mechanics here. You could very easily just hack them in. You gain a skill or you gain a +1, whatever. I don't think that's very interesting, but you could do it. But the idea is just like, you are likely not necessarily to die. I mean, probably die, but like more likely, hopefully you will try to achieve something that you want, save some friend of yours or defend your farm or kill a wizard, right? But in the process, things will get worse for you explicitly. Like it's baked into the rules. At some point, you're going to fail a roll, and you're going to be like, "Oh, well, now your leg is screwed," or "Oh, you've run out of food," and that's going to make everything harder. And then that compounds because then future rolls are more difficult. There's not really a mechanic for and now I've gathered up magical items. That makes the next encounter easier. It's like no, it's going to get harder until it falls apart.
Yeah, that feels very Cormac McCarthy to Chris's point. It's like, I'm imagining a game where you have scores like horse, knife, doing the wrong thing over and over again, and drinking too much until you you wake in a week later from your bender, and those are the things you're investing points in or whatever, and that's what it's the game simulating. I do want to ask, because you'd mentioned it, and I want to be mindful of time. Are you working on other games? Because you sort of implied that maybe you're going to play around with some of the things you like, some of the mechanics, but moving away from the Gauchos sort of idea.
Yeah.
Other settings. And I am really curious. We didn't talk about this at all, but how it relates to Borough Bound, and maybe it doesn't, but just I know you spend so much time and put so much thought into those settings, and there is a depth of kind of lore and whatnot, even though it's given, it's kind of light looking, right? It's meant to be very easy to digest. It's a it's a subscription model, but it's there's a lot to your world.
Why do you mention the subscription model?
No, I just mean you're getting little pieces. It's not like 400-page book, right?
It necessitates a constant drip feed of new fantasy stuff that I'm writing all the time.
I'm curious how that intersects with your kind of mechanical, like, I'm running these games for a couple playtest groups and I want to like fuck with them or get them.
I honestly I didn't think about those two questions. The answer is very related in a way that I wasn't predicting until you said it. I have a follow-up game of sorts, and again, this is like I have no intention of necessarily monetizing this, though I have a bad habit of eventually making a professional version of the thing that I'm trying to work on. Speaking of which, thank you, Chris and Wythe, for publishing Gunless Gauchos and dedicating your layout and your design. It looks beautiful. And I hope people do read it because it's free and it's sick and it's easy to play. End of plug.
Yeah, it's free. Yeah, I get
it. I for the same group of people that I was doing this Western campaign with, I wanted to do something stupid over summer break while one of our players was away. I was like, well, we got 4 players, so we're not going to keep going with the Western campaign. We'll come back to that. Let's take a little pause and do something stupid in the meantime. So I made a game with kind of the same DNA as Gunless Gauchos. It's still 4 stats. It's still, here are 20 skills, pick 3 of them. It's still a handful of like really theme relevant narrative rules, but just like very, very slight. Except instead of being about like, frontier justice, it's a play on the television show Selling Sunset, which is about really dickhead real estate agents or brokers rather in Los Angeles, and it was just what if this, but in a fantasy setting.
That's hilarious.
So it uses
horrible.
It uses a Borough Bound setting that we created based on their old campaign, a setting called Ancora Bay, which is a big weird sort of mid post-apocalyptic / pre-next apocalyptic tropical setting that's just like it's kind of just like a kitchen sink sort of setting where it's like there are cultists and there are pirates and there's an orcish government and there's a lot of Will Savino trademarks of really this is about capitalism so that made it the perfect setting to do like what if I use basically the same rule set or the same DNA, but it's an adversarial game about brokers not trying to become rich, but just trying to become as like infamously annoying as possible. So that was very fun. That ended up being like one of the most fun little arcs quests of just 4 total
funny.
Like explicitly, because a lot of times there's the lawful good paladin problem, which is the opposite of the murder hobo rogue problem, right? If you have that do good paladin in your party, it kind of flattens a lot of moral and character questions, and you can't really have fun with that player in some ways. So in this game, you explicitly get points, like just straight up points, if you do something extremely outrageous in public. So it just motivates stupid, fun, silly play.
Yeah, so it's like a housewives sim.
Exactly.
Like
yeah. Selling Sunset is Real Housewives, except for some reason they're also selling homes.
Well, I like that a lot because I like speculative architecture. So I would have a lot of fun designing the buildings and the walkthroughs, and then just being a neutral referee while a bunch of housewives like.
That's exactly what it is.
So I want to play this, Will. I want to like.
Let's play test it. Yeah, I have it. It's really we had a lot of. It's not remotely balanced because. As like it's an adversarial game
that's fine.
Based on the GM giving out points, so it's basically whose line is it anyway, right? Like,
or it's like what's the The funny British one.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Taskmaster?
Yeah, Taskmaster. I was
Yeah,
going to say, it
yeah,
sounds like
yeah.
Taskmaster. Right?
So like
The
I give out the
Taskmaster,
points,
yeah.
or the GM gives out the points, and I just have to be like, yeah, that counts as you gain 2 fame, or you gain 3 fame, or you don't gain any fame there. That wasn't outrageous enough, right? And then like there's a mechanic for sealing the deal, which is like, do you succeed on selling this home? And the difficulty there is set based on GM fiat. And also, there's not even any technical point to selling houses, except that it gives you money, and you can use money to like basically boost rolls, kind of like the grid system. It's really stupid, but
Right.
it reinforces that idea that sometimes the point of games really can be, yes, there are stakes, but we've decided that the stakes are stupid. Like,
Yeah, it's kind of meta. It's
Yeah,
like we're
yeah.
making fun of like, why would we be doing this? But now we're doing it. Yeah,
it's pretty fun though.
it does sound fun. It also, honestly, and my brain of course goes to like, well, I think you could balance it pretty easily. Not that I'm a big fan of balancing all things in all games, but it's like you could just have a 6-row table of suggested fame point whatevers,
Yeah.
and then GMs can do whatever they want. But at least then players and GMs can read a thing and be like, okay, I kind of get what is 1 fame versus 2 versus 3, and etc. Right? Like you can balance it in the sense that you can give people handrails to learning how to have fun using your sort of
Absolutely. And
structure,
if I made a publishable version, I would have a lot more like sort of GM advice. Weirdly, I don't know, here's a game design question that I ran into that may just be an unsolvable question, but the nature of this game is because it's adversarial, because it's about a profession that exists in the world that people know about, there ended up being a lot of one-on-one scenes with one player and the GM. And there are like tools to try to motivate things like, almost I can't imagine a party in which someone wouldn't take the skill host an event. And like if you host an event, everyone's going to be there, right? Like all the players. And like barge in unexpectedly is one of the skills. So like someone Kramers into every scene pretty much. But there's sort of a problem of like, well, since we're mimicking a thing that really happens, there will be a lot of instances of just like, well, this is just one of the players is trying to sell a home to an NPC, and the GM is playing every role except that of the broker in this situation. I don't know if there's a solution to that. It also didn't really matter because we were all having fun just role playing and like.
No, but I actually, because I was working on a weirdly, I wouldn't say similar game, but in some ways one of the first games I was working on other than Stillfleet, which I never published, but I've talked with Gay a lot about, is a game called Taking the Heat, where you're an entrepreneur, you're a restaurateur, you're starting a restaurant, and the other players, on your turn, other players are customers.
Mm. Oh, that's fun.
And I was thinking you could do something similar with open houses, where if you're the
broker, that's what I was
going
to suggest.
Yeah, everyone else is like also annoying, and they also want attention, but they are not a housewife. And the problem is, if there's a funny waiter or maitre d' or like other guest at a fine dining restaurant or something, the housewife is going to be annoyed that they're, you know what I mean? Like it's annoying not to be the center of attention if you're that narcissistic. So I think it'd be interesting. Also,
which works here because the goal is being annoyingly narcissistic. Like that's
exactly.
That is a good thing.
And if maybe like there's different kinds of fantasy rich people doing fantasy rich things. I mean, this is a whole nother discussion around class and like Ancora Bay and whatever. But it just as a way to rotate jobs. Also, that is a thing that other games do a lot that we don't do. We do focus on sort of single, avatar. Right? You make a character that you're really invested in, like a D&D type experience. But I like kind of games and have had fun playing some where you rotate through a bunch of roles. So maybe that's. You could probably come up with other roles than just.
It really did feel almost like, I'm embarrassed to say this, y'all, but I performed improv comedy every Monday for 5 years of my life, and for better or worse, that's like in my DNA, being an annoying guy. But it kind of felt like the game ended up being sort of just like an improv comedy cheat sheet. It's like, oh, if you just follow these rules, you're gonna kind of naturally end up in a situation where you're doing funny scenes. And like there's a TV show that's kind of like this, Bajillion Dollar Properties, which was on CISO, our favorite NBC themed comedy streaming app, as you remember. Silence for the crowd. But it was also like a comedy, making fun of these $1 million mansions or whatever that show is called. In a way, a good RPG rule set is, hey, here is a guide to doing a good improv scene that you don't need to read Truth and Comedy first in order to be good at it. You can kind of just read this RPG, and naturally, by just following what your character wants to do, you might end up doing good improv. So that's kind of what this game feels like, because none of the folks that I was playing with, I think, have ever done comedy in any setting like that. But we were all like, they were all being hilarious. I was absolutely cracking up the entire time we played.
Yeah, that's a really good point too about the different kinds of prompts and tools. And instead of saying here's a sheet with lists of things you can do that cause damage to bad guys, you could also make that about like telling jokes. And I want to shout out a friend I made fairly recently, who's a stand-up comic and writer named David Piccolini, has a game coming out called, I think it's called Road Rage, but it's about being a stand-up comic, and it's really fun. I actually read a draft version of the rules. I really want to run it because it's almost like a PBTA thing, but it has like different kinds of comic, different kinds of jokes. But his whole idea was like, you don't have to write the jokes. Like, you're doing a scene where you describe the kind of joke, and it'll be funny because like there's asshole hecklers, there's other comics,
right.
like,
but you don't need to be a joke writer just to play the game.
Need to write
just
jokes,
to say and then my character tells.
But it gets you
raunchy.
I'm not a huge stand-up guy, so like reading through it, I was like, oh, this person knows stand-up really well. Like the way that it sets up like what happens before a show, during a show, like even the lighting, which I never thought of, like who does the lights for this and does it matter? But it clearly was one of those things where it's like, oh, to your point, it's like this could help someone understand a whole genre of human activity, and it has nothing to do with bashing goblins. And you don't have to have known anything about that activity before because it's breaking it down procedurally. So I think that's a cool way to approach game design, is like, if I know enough about the thing, and I'm not saying you sell mansions, but you've watched TV about it or whatever, you can kind of step someone through it. And the improv, to your point, you do know about comedy and storytelling, so you can step someone through like, this is going to be funny because you're all
was never explicitly my goal. Honestly, I sent a poll to my players, and I was just like, hey, John has to do that thing where he runs a summer camp all summer, so we got to take a break from the main campaign. And then I just like farted out 10 ideas for what we could do for a mini campaign, and they're like, yeah, that one where we're brokers in Ancora Bay sounds fun. And I was like, okay, I guess I got to write a new game based on a thing I said. But the result was partially because I think that there is an effective amount of mechanical complexity baked into this really simple format that I made for Gunless Gauchos, which I transposed, and partially just because the idea is funny and people were familiar with the tropes of cheesy real estate show the same way that they're familiar with the tropes of Wild West fiction. It was really easy to just like put that hat on, do stupid ass scenes, and also like engage with the mechanical complexity of it. 3 of the players were brokers, and one of them was like a slumlord, and like the mechanical differences between how the slumlord approached versus the other 2 was really funny. He ended up allowing a bunch of frog people to basically do eminent domain as long as they could like watch out and make sure that a neighboring property doesn't get bought up. And like that's so funny because it actually was using the mechanics of the game.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
So if you want to publish this,
I was gonna say we just
you have right of first refusal or whatever it's called.
Yeah, let's do it. Will.
Okay, cool.
Yeah,
right now it's just called selling it. I just called it selling Ancora because it's selling Sunset. That's a little boring though, so we could spice it up.
No, it's it's great. We'll bring take your time. We have to keep producing Chris's game, and we want people to play Gunless Gauchos.
I would like you to take a break from Chris's Kickstarter and focus on this game. This is what's important to me right now, and I feel like it would be.
I'll just take a back seat. Yeah, big deal, Will.
It's not like it's time.
Fine.
There's not money on the line or anything. All right. Well, Will, it's about 8. So, is there anything else we've not covered? I do want to say we should go into it a little bit. We can spend as much time or as little as you want. The soundtrack, the original soundtrack for Danse Macabre, was something. I think it makes total sense. Chris is into the world of Dungeon Synth. I was not too familiar, and especially did not appreciate that. To something you guys already said, just to kind of underline it, it is like its own special thing.
Oh yeah,
it's not like people fooling around making silly medieval sounds. It's not really. I love industrial music and metal, and it's not either of those things either. It's kind of its own type of use of synthesizers and use of callbacks to medieval kinds of sound worlds, but it's its own thing, and it's fun to see performed live. That kind of sold me on it because it's people are all dressed up, and it feels like LARPing but in a very meta, like people are self-aware. It felt very inclusive. At least the one in Brooklyn, maybe it's because it was in Brooklyn, but it felt like a really fun sort of scene. So I think it's cool that Chris had reached out, and we have 6 dungeon synth artists. And then, because I've just been saying, if people ask me, oh, it's 7 dungeons synth artists, but it's really 6 practicing
and
dungeon
then
synth
me.
artists and you. And I think you probably wouldn't describe yourself
No,
first and
no,
foremost
not
as a
at all.
dungeon synth artist. So I don't know if you wanted to talk about kind of, soundtracking and just your thoughts on like, what Danse Macabre quote unquote sounds like, or I mean, we
Yeah.
talked about it in the past when you've been on, but like, what's good for GMs to sort of put in the background, right? And I don't know, Chris, if you
Yeah.
want to add to that or anything. I just thought we could close out sort of, reminding people this is the next thing we're trying to get together for the game, right?
Chris is talking, but I can't hear them.
I will say, just as a brief correction, it's 5 dungeons.
I don't know if we lost. I think we might have lost Chris, but the audio there.
I heard 5
Chris, type it in
Go
the
on.
chat. Type it in the chat. We'll read the correction. I'm sorry if I misspoke.
I don't know.
Agreed. Yes, correct. I don't consider myself a dungeon synth artist. I've made music that is dungeon synth adjacent before, or like borrowing some of that sonic world. Tape emulation. I mean, I'm emulating tape, like cassette tape, whereas I know a lot of dungeon synth artists like are really into physical hardware and whatnot. So I don't want to say I thought of myself as like a poser, but in a sense, I was putting on a hat that I'd never really worn before of like, I'm trying to make some authentic dungeon synth. But I think that there's this risk that a lot of GMs think that when they're scoring their tabletop games, their goal is to evoke some sense of diegesis. But it's almost like this imagined cinematic diegesis. Oh, if my Dungeons and Dragons game were a movie, this is what music would be playing in the background. Which obviously that's not actually diegetic. That's not realistic because your adventurers wouldn't have friggin' music playing while they're fighting. They wouldn't have music on. There would, there's one guy who knows how to play an instrument and he's like 30 miles from you, right? So the idea of diegesis is nonsense, and for that, unless you're in a tavern that's meant to specifically have a band, whatever. But once you throw out that requirement, I think it should free a lot of GMs to accept a way wider swath of music to help score their adventures than many limit themselves to right now, right? Like the argument that I always make is there's a sort of canon, right, of fantasy music. You're putting on the Skyrim soundtrack, you're putting on Lord of the Rings, you're putting on a couple other fantasy video game soundtracks because that's what fantasy music should sound like. But my argument is, can you imagine a scenario in which your players are fighting a bunch of demons and devils in some like hellish hellscape in a purely fantasy campaign, right? Would you play the soundtrack to Doom 2016? Video game scored by Mick Gordon, crazy synthesizers, heavy metal guitars, badass drums. Like the answer to me to that question is like so obviously definitively yes. And if you answer yes to that question, then what else could you play? Would you play jazz during an investigation? Would you play, Celine Dion during some really impactful moment? I probably wouldn't go that far, but I think the door should be wide open, and you just need to think about what your music is telling your players about the mood or theme or vibe of a campaign.
Well, that's a really good point, but all those examples are pretty on the nose in terms of vibe and expectations of the genre. And I think it also would be interesting to just keep in mind, like, I don't usually play music when I'm GMing.
Yeah, of course. Maybe I'm only talking to people who are willing to.
No. I feel like I should, though. And I feel like because you could actually do a lot, not only with, of course, Doom during the fight against the Balrog or whatever, but also you could play Celine Dion during the fight against the Balrog.
Of course, yeah. I mean, playing against expectations.
And I don't know what that, I've never actually thought about it too much, but I think that might actually be a really fun kind of practice to explore as a GM. I mean, we're always like, doing new shit as GMs. I think as we get tired, we're improvising and you're making shit up and trying things. So I'm saying that as a note to self. Like, man, now
Sure,
I
yeah.
try
I think playing against expectations is great. It's huge. I also think like let's start from a baseline of do more than Google fantasy ambience 1 hour and then click the first YouTube you see. I think like 1 degree more of caring about how you score your campaigns can just absolutely transform the immersion. And so like if you play Dungeon Synth, which is its own genre, like we said, you are definitely telling your players something about what the tone of this adventure is. It immediately harkens back to like retro RPG gaming, right? There are so many retro sounds involved. There is a built-in darkness, a built-in sort of, I don't know, I guess I'd say like liminality, but that feels like such a friggin' Gen Z Reddit word. There is this sense of unease and sort of awareness and self-conscious usage of retro ideas, right? So if you play a little bit of Dungeon Synth, you're telling your players, yeah, there's danger. Yeah, we sort of have an OSR vibe here. Yeah, it's a little bit spooky, but it's also like, don't expect a standard skeleton. If you see a skeleton, he's going to be a fucked up skeleton. If you see some mutant guy, he doesn't have a perfect 5e stat block. This is going to be a little stranger than that, and you should try to bask in that mood and not just be like, okay, this is like a quick and easy critical role adventure. This is something stranger and perhaps more meditative. That to me is like all of the thoughts that would accompany, oh, my GM is choosing to play Dungeon Synth right now instead of that typical fantasy fare.
Yeah, I mean, that's, again, this is why we have you on, Will. I think it's really insightful, and I think I wouldn't have thought too much about it. Again, I'm not as focused on the audio world, but I think you're right that every, like when I listen to Nine Inch Nails all the time still.
Sure, yeah.
It's like, I think there's something about that like what is it doing for, it's like, I think it sounds like things are breaking, but it also, by the end of the song, you always hear these kind of reconstructions. And I think that's something I go back to with industrial more than I do with metal. And I don't listen to a lot of pure synthetic, like electronic genres, because I think they're too acousmatic. They're not tied to like, I feel like you can almost hear someone like bashing a machine apart, and then like the machine makes a new world, a sort of post whatever the fuck we're in, horrible dystopia now world. And I think there's something actually sort of hopeful, or there's like a thread of like catharsis to being like, let's break the shit and maybe something else will happen. And I don't know. That's just me.
I try to think more deeply about like the musical connotations, so that we're not just doing like, hey, this is fantasy, except, sometimes I do that. We did this setting, Falthringor. It's a big medieval-ish castle on a mountaintop, and most of the aesthetic inspo that we used for like the art and design was explicitly medieval Polish. There's like the armor is basically flying Hussar armor. It's sick, it's cool. But I was just like, okay, I'm gonna do like a faux sort of Slavic, close to performance practice period of that Polish, folk music. Just drew on a lot of Polish stuff for that. And sometimes I do that, but a lot of times I try to get a little bit more like, no, like what is the real essence of this? Are we going like dark, crunchy jazz because we're trying to say something a little more? Is this like straight up noir? And like when I've made Stillfleet music in the past, like it is, like, industrial, it is crunchy. There's probably an element of like pulp, right? And cheese to it. But there's also an element of like, what is that goopy disgustingness in there? Like I did this track Subtle Fluid for your Kickstarter that was meant to be, explicitly gloopy because it was about weird nanotech vampires. And I think that there was more than just, okay, can I capture the setting in this music? It's, can I capture what this RPG is about, like on one layer more fundamental than that. And for Danse Macabre, I think going with a Dungeon Synth sound whips. And I think if you had how about this? I stand by this. If Danse Macabre had color illustrations throughout, I would have said, do not use Dungeon Synth. I just wouldn't have thought it was appropriate. I think because you have the black and white art throughout with a touch of orange, I think, to me immediately, the Dungeon Synth makes sense because there is
spooky retro, to your point.
There's an element of, there's the zine culture sort of thing. There's this element of counterculture it is, and it's like, oh, you know, you're a professional RPG studio, right? So you could do it in color if you wanted to, but there was
Yeah,
a
we ran out
deliberate
of
no.
color. We had no more inks.
There's a deliberate I'm holding back. I'm not going to give you, you know, every color of the rainbow. I'm not going to give you realistic sounding orchestra samples, you know, in Pro Tools or whatever. I'm going to give you crappy old romplers or like, you know, Korg synthesizers kind of sounding like a lute, and that's what you're getting. And it's going to be like crunched out to hell because we did this on tape, not because we had to, but because we could, right?
Yeah. Well, I love that. I think as last words go, obviously, Will, you can say other stuff in a second. We'll ask about plugs. Chris, do you have any last questions? And sorry, everyone, if there's, I think, Chris, you had a couple audio hiccups, so apologies if we were cutting you off.
It's intentional. They're supposed to be cutting out. It's sort of a dungeon synthy vibe. Yeah.
It's a dungeon synth callback. Yeah, exactly.
God damn it.
I don't know if we're getting Chris's audio.
I think we're going to hear a couple snippets in like 30 seconds jumping
exactly.
in. Yeah,
exactly. All right. Well, with that, Will.
Sure.
Final thoughts and where can people find you and support your work? I think we've already mentioned, you know, Music
Sure.
and Borough Bound, but feel free to, you know, say more.
My music is all over. Will Savino and Borough Bound are two different artists on different platforms, and Borough Bound makes maps and setting guides, and we make just so much cool RPG stuff. I have the most incredible team. I'm very proud and lucky to work with them. But also, if anything I've said has sounded kind of smart, please follow our blog/newsletter, because I've just been writing deep, dense articles that from a business standpoint should probably be SEO farming, but instead I'm decided to put way too much effort into it. So please read the Borough Bound blog, where, I mean, I've written about Doom 2016 soundtrack. I've written about the importance of frontiers and tabletop campaigns. I've written about a lot of the kinds of stuff that I talk about. So if any of this is interesting, yeah, you can follow me there.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Will Savino, as always.
Thank you for having me. I love talking to y'all. You're the smartest people in RPGs, and I really appreciate that you want to talk to me.
No, I just obsessively somehow always make adventures the most about food. Chris is really smart and made an awesome game, Das Macabre. We're funding it now live on Kickstarter. Through November 6th, you get special Kickstarter-only deals. Please help us unlock stretch goals like the Das Macabre original soundtrack with Will Savino, Glowmag, who's chiptunes, not Dungeon Synth, and then 5 cool Dungeon Synth people, a couple of whom I met in person and listened to, and you know, again, they're all really nice, actually, not just good musicians, but also like nice people who are smart, who like had thoughtful things to say, just like Will, you did when we've talked about music in the past. And I was like, oh, this motherfucker, like, he knows stuff, like he's asking deep questions. So I always appreciate that when we're working across, you know, with different artists, collaborating, and you know, me as a non-musician, it's great to like learn something every time. So thanks, Will. Thanks, Chris, and thanks to anyone listening to or watching Why We Roll, the Tabletop Game Design Podcast. We'll be back soon, very soon. We're here all the time. Bye, y'all. Have a wonderful evening.